I just thought I'd let you guys in on a little secret, the newest Canadian invention. This is the Canadian patented Canadian dovetail system. We got our chainsaw mounted right into our table saw bed here. She works perfect for cutting dovetails, and you'll be able to see this at every woodworking show. So we'll just turn this baby on and finish off cutting these dovetails right here. Boy, that cuts smooth.
Wow, I'd love to see the safety manual for that jig. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. Today we're going to be taking a look at a dovetail jig that's just a little bit safer. That's the deluxe dovetail jig made by Porter Cable. So let's dig into this tool and I'll show you exactly how it works. So this is a tool that honestly doesn't get enough love in my shop. I've had this thing for about 3 years and I can probably count on one hand how many times I've used it.
I can count to 1,000 on my fingers.
But that's not because this is a bad tool. I got this jig after I was making a bunch of drawers and I thought to myself this would be great to have the next time I make some drawers. But the problem is I haven't made any drawers in quite some time, but that's about to change here real soon. So let's go take a look at this jig and I'll show you what it comes with. So these are all the accessories that come with the jig. As you can see, there's 2 sets of router bits, one for larger dovetails and one for smaller dovetails. Since you have the ability to cut larger dovetails and smaller dovetails, it comes with 2 plates for dovetails, along with the bushings for each size dovetails. It also comes with a little plate that allows you to do box joints. It also comes with a couple of hex keys, some extra parts, as well as a mounting bracket. And since there's so many accessories to this tool, and this is probably a tool you're not going to be using every day, I highly recommend getting a little storage bin to hold all your pieces in one place. But that's enough about what comes with this jig. I'm sure most of you are interested in how this tool works and how you set it up, so that's what we're going to do now. And for today's video, we're going to be doing larger through dovetails, which I think is one of the most used applications for this jig. Now, one of the nicest things about this jig is if you ever misplace your instructions, it actually has the instructions for the 4 most common cuts listed right on the side of the jig. So let's go check those out. If we take a look at the left-hand side of this jig, you can see there's instructions for half-blind dovetails as well as through dovetails. And today we're going to be doing through dovetails. You can also see there's instructions for standard dovetails, which is what we're doing, as well as mini dovetails. This will tell you what dovetail bit you need, in this case 43776 PC, as well as the template guide, which is 42040. And each of the bits come in a case that's very clearly labeled, so you know exactly which bit you need. If we take a look at the right-hand side of the jig, you can see there's instructions for box joints as well as sliding dovetails. This once again gives you the item numbers for the bits you're going to need. So this is a nice little quick reminder and a refresher so that you know exactly what bits and templates you need to make your cuts.
Now that's refreshing.
So let's get started and set up our jig so that we can make some of those through dovetails. So in order to make our dovetails today, we're going to need 3 pieces of wood. I've got 2 pieces of oak and a piece of poplar here, all milled up to 3/4 of an inch. Our 2 pieces of oak will be used to make the dovetails and our poplar will be used as a wasteboard. We're also going to need some bushings, the bushing mount, as well as our larger template. Now the first thing that we want to do is to take the larger template guide and place it into the jig with the tails facing us. When you're using this jig, you always want to cut the tails first. So we'll take our template and with the tail sides facing us, we'll place it into the jig. In order to do that, we're going to take these little prongs and place it in between the brass bushing as well as the tightening knobs on both sides. Once we've placed our template inside the jig, it should resemble this.
Nice.
Once we have our template guide installed, it's now time to place our wasteboard. So over at the jig, you'll notice a little lever that slides back and forth. This is what tightens your wasteboard to the jig. You'll also notice 2 knobs that open the jaws of the clamp. So we'll take our wasteboard and we'll place it underneath that jaw, and then we'll place it underneath our template. Once that's done, we'll temporarily clamp it down. So now that we have our wasteboard attached to that jig, we now want to set our template guide so it matches the thickness of our wasteboard. Now, as you remember, we just simply slid this template into the jig with the tail side facing us, and it's very loose at this point. In order to tighten this down, we're going to put pressure on our wasteboard and tighten these two knobs.
Point.
Now that we have our template set to the exact thickness of our wasteboard, we now need to take our wasteboard and align it to the template. To do this, we need to get a bird's eye view of the wasteboard.
Hey, my name's Peter. I'm a spokesman for the Birds Are Real movement. Right now I'm just traveling the country in this van, holding rallies and spreading the feathered gospel.
What we're trying to do here is to align the very edge of the wasteboard with these little notches that run down the length of the template. So I'll loosen the clamp for the wasteboard and slowly make adjustments until we're reasonably aligned, and then I'll tighten the clamp. Now we're most likely going to make some micro adjustments to that wasteboard, so it's not essentially that it's perfectly aligned at this point. Now that we have our wasteboard temporarily installed in the jig, we're now going to take the piece of wood that we're going to be cutting the tails into. To do this, we'll simply take our wood and slide it into the bottom of the jig until it hits the top of our template. Once we have the wood slid into place, we want to make sure that it's exactly centered in between all the tails we'll be cutting. So I'll make a little adjustment here. Now that it's centered, I'll lock it down. And it's at this point that you should see no gap between the template and the workpiece. Now that we have our tail piece installed, we can go to set the fence on the jig so that when we go to do the pins, everything will be perfectly aligned. And this may be a little bit difficult to see here, but there's a little black piece that will slide up right against the edge of your wood. Once it's touching the edge of your wood, you can tighten it down with the Allen wrench. And here's a closer look at how that black piece rests right up against the edge of your wood. So now that we have the tail piece locked down and that black fence aligned, let's take one last look at the wasteboard to make sure it's perfectly aligned as well. And here you can see that wasteboard is just a little bit off, so I'll loosen up the clamp and adjust the wasteboard so that everything's aligned. Then I'll tighten down the clamp. So now that we have the wood set up for our tails, we now need to focus on the router, so let's do that next. So if we take a look at the cheat sheet on the side of the jig, you can see that we'll need a dovetail bit that's 43776 PC. We're also going to need the template guide 42040. And as you can probably remember, the router bits are very clearly labeled as well as the template guides. And you can see right on the inside there, it says 42040. So I'll install the router bit and the guide bushing and we'll move on to the next step. So with the dovetail bit and the guide bushing installed in that router, it's now time to set the depth of that router bit. And in my opinion, it's nice to have a plunge router to set the depth for this Porter Cable jig. But it really is easy to set the depth of your router bit with this jig. Let me show you how. So if we take a look at the left-hand side of this jig, you'll notice a couple of notches here. And these are what you slide your guide bushings into so that you can set the depth of your router bit. So I'll take my router and slide it into the center slot. Once my router is in place, I then can lower the router bit until it touches the very top of this pad. And then I can lock my router into place. Now those depth stops are adjustable, however, mine came pretty well lined right out of the factory. So with all of our setup complete, it's now time to begin to cut out our tails. So how this is going to work is our guide bushing is going to rest right up against each one of these fingers on our template. We'll go back and forth until all the tails are cut out. So let's fire this router up and cut out those tails. So here's a look at what we just cut out. You can see how the wasteboard protected those dovetails as our router bit went back and forth so that there was no tear out. So let's remove our dovetails and see how they turned out. And here's a look at those dovetails, and you can see how crisp and clean they are with virtually no tear out. So now that we have these dovetails cut out, it's now time to focus on the pins. And the pins are just a little bit easier to set up since we did some of the setup already for these dovetails. So the first thing that we're going to do is to take the piece of wood that we're cutting our pins into and slide it into the jig, making sure that we're resting it right against that black fence. Once we have that in place, we can lock it down. The next thing that we need to do is to flip the template around so that the pin side is facing forward. To do this, we'll simply loosen the two knobs in front. This will release the template so that we can rotate it around. Now we want to make sure that we don't adjust the brass bushings in the very front. Then we can slide the template right back into place. Now it's time to tighten down the template in the same way we did before. So we'll put pressure right on the wasteboard and we'll tighten the two knobs. Then we'll flip the wasteboard around and align it to our tailpiece. Now this probably isn't completely necessary as there's probably enough support here to prevent tear out. However, I'm going to do it anyway. So I'll release the clamp, flip the wasteboard around, and realign it. Now that we have the pin piece and the wasteboard installed, let's talk about some micro adjustments you can make to either make your dovetails looser or tighter. So if we take a look at the front left-hand corner of the template, you can see there's a little diagram here that says you can push the template back for looser joints or pull it forward for tighter joints. And this is referring to that little line that we use to align our wasteboard to our workpiece. And this really is a matter of trial and error. If we wanted a tighter joint, we would bring the line on the template forward in front of this seam. If we wanted a looser joint, we would bring the line on the template backward in back of the seam. And to adjust the template either forward or backward, we would rotate this little bronze knob here to make micro adjustments to the template placement itself. And this is why it's a good idea before you batch out a bunch of dovetails to do a few test cuts just to make sure you're happy with how those dovetails fit together. So now that I feel comfortable with all of my alignments, it's now time to switch out our bushing and our router bit in our router. And if we look at the cheat sheet on the side of the jig, you can see that we need a straight bit 43743 PC and we need the template bushing 42046. And I'll make a quick note here that you actually need the guide bushing 42047 instead of 42046. I'm sure that was an older part number, but you actually need the 42047. Other than that, everything is once again very clearly labeled, so I just need to switch out my bushing and my router bit. With my router bit and bushing installed, let's go head back to the jig and set the depth of this router bit. And to do this, we're once again going to use the notch on the left-hand side, slide our bushing in, and set the depth of our router bit. So I'll lower my bit and lock it into place. After that, it's just a matter of following our template with our guide bushing to create those pins. And you're going to want to take this fairly slow. As you're following the template and you get to those sharp edges, your router's going to want to slip on you, so just be careful. So let me fire this router up so that we can finish our pins and be done with these dovetails. And here's a look at the results of the cuts we just made. So let's take this out of the jig and see how well it fits. And here's a look at the piece itself. There's very little tear out and it's nice and clean. Now I can already tell that these joints are going to be a little bit tight, so I could probably stand to loosen the jig just a tad. And here I'll tap that joint together. So here's a closer look at how this joint came together. You can see they're fairly tight, and if we rotate a little bit, they're just a little bit proud, which is what I like to see in a dovetail. I can always sand this flush so that it's a nice tight fit. Now this joint isn't perfect by any means. I need to make some micro adjustments to get this to fit how I'd like, and that's exactly why you need to do some test cuts before you go to do your real thing. But for my first dovetail in probably 3 years, it's just as easy as I remember it. So if you're looking to batch out a bunch of dovetails with precision and ease, check out the Porter Cable Dovetail Jig. It's got you covered. Well, thanks for joining me today, folks. I really appreciate you joining me on checking out one of my old favorites, the Porter Cable Dovetail Jig. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.